So in the last class, what we have seen is we have seen how to do the subquery, right? We have seen the non-correlated subquery. So today, what do we want to start with? There are two types of subquery, right? Correlated and non-correlated, right? So we talked about the non-correlated subqueries in the last class. Today, what we want to start with is the correlated subqueries. In the last class, we have also introduced the concept for the table alias, right? We have talked about how do you table alias, like the same way you alias your columns, the same way you can alias your tables. That would be useful when you will be having multiple tables in your query, or when you would be doing subquery for the correlated queries. We will see how to use the alias. So now, before starting the correlated subquery, we have to understand one more thing: how to use the exist. In SQL, in the where condition, we have seen in, between, right? Like operators and everything. Before starting correlated subqueries, it would be good to understand what exist is. Okay, so how you can use exist in the SQL server is, it's just say, whenever you're writing subquery, okay, it says, okay, if the inner query returns any result, then run the outer query. Okay, so think about this: if I have one query as an outer query and one query as an inner query, now if I'm saying, okay, where exist, and I'm running the inner query, right? So what does it mean is, it will only run the outer query if the inner query has any of the results returned. If the inner query doesn't return anything, the outer query won't be run. So what it's saying is, check if the inner query exists. Exist means if there is any data in the inner query, then run the outer query. If there is no data returned, the outer query will not run. Okay, so what I want to do is, I want to run person.contact. I want to run the whole table, because I'm saying select star from person.contact, where exist, select star from human resources.employee, where contact ID equals to 100. So what would happen? Let's see. First, run the inner query. When we run the inner query, what do we get? We get nothing. So is there anything returned by the inner query? No, right? So when you run the whole query, the inner and the outer together, will the person.contact run? No, because the inner query doesn't return anything. So because you're saying is where exist, it means the inner query has to exist. The data from the inner query has to exist. If it doesn't exist, then it will not run the outer query. So let's run this, the whole query together, the subquery. So if you run, see, there is nothing returned by the subquery. Why? Because you mentioned in the condition, you're saying select star from person.contact. You see there are about 19,000 records. But what you do is you put the where condition on the person.contact. What is the where condition? Where exist. And then you say select star from human resources.employee, where contact ID equals to 100. So if the contact ID 100 doesn't exist in this table, in the human resources.employee, you're not going to get any record from person.contact. Okay. So let's say if you want to see all the records from person.contact when contact ID 100 exists in employee table. So that's what the query is. So you say, okay, check if human resources.employee has contact ID 100, then run person.contact, else don't run it. Okay. In the same way, let's try a different contact ID and see if we have the contact ID. So I'm selecting contact ID 1002 this time, 1002. Does it exist? Yes. If it exists, what's going to happen? The outer query will run, right? And it will run for all the records that are in the table, right? So when you execute, it's going to run and return all 19,972 records. So basically exist2 is, it just say, if the inner query returns any data, run the outer query, else don't run it. Okay. Does it make sense? So the person.contact you're running, it will be returning all the contact ID, not just 1002, because in the where condition, you didn't say contact ID equals to 1002. You just say if the inner query has data, then run the whole table. So that's why you're getting all 19,000 records from person.contact when you say where exists. So either you get whole table or nothing. Okay. So the exist, what it would do is, it would do all the data or nothing. because there is no dependency between the inner query and the outer query, right? Does it make sense? Okay, now let's expand this thing on the same thing. What we would do is, if I ask you, okay, now you're using the exist, right? But what do you want to do is, if let's say, can you give me let's say what we do is we say employee ID 100 here. Okay, this time we change it to employee ID. So do we have employee ID in here in the table? Yes, we do. So if you run the whole query, what you're gonna get? Oops, what happened? If you run the whole query, what are you gonna get? You're gonna get all the records from person.contact. Now if I say, okay, what I want you to do is, I want you to run this person.contact, but only if, or only for the contact ID for that employee. So what is contact ID for the employee? The contact ID for the employee 100 is 1099. Now when you run this query, it should return only the contact for the person for employee 100. I don't want to see everything. How do you do that? So when the person.contact runs, you want to run only for contact ID 1099. How do you do that? So right now, if you are running, it's returning all the records from person.contact, right? It returns everything. No. What you want to do now is you want to return only those contacts that exist in your inner query. How do you do that? You want to return only those records from person.contact if it exists for the employee 100. Okay, so the employee 100, what is the contact ID? 1099. So you want to run the person.contact only for those contact which is returned by human resources.employee. How do you do that? So you remember in the last class we have seen the correlated non-correlated subquery, right? You can use the non-correlated. What do? You just say in here where contact ID, right? And what do? Select contact ID, right? That's what you're going to do. So if you do this, what you're saying, select the contact ID for employee 100. What it would give you? It would give you 1099. And then you're going to say, run this person.contact for the contact ID returned by the inner query, right? So if you run this, you're going to get only one record from person.contact. Does it make sense? So this is the thing that we have seen in the last class. Now, how do you implement the same thing with using exist? So when we use the exist, what we're going to say, we're going to use the correlated concept. So this is the non-correlated subquery. We're going to implement the same query using the non-correlated query or using the exist. How do you do that? So in order to do that, what you need to do. So right now, does this person.contact get any parameter or get any contact ID from the inner query? No. That's why it's running the whole table, right? So what you can do is, because in here, you cannot mention anything. You cannot say contact ID exists because it doesn't exist. So exist doesn't run for the parameter. Exist is dependent on the inner query. Okay. So you cannot say contact ID exists and select contact ID. You cannot do that. So just you cannot do instead of in, you cannot say exist. Okay. Because the exist doesn't take the column name before. Exist is dependent on the inner query. So if the inner query returns, it returns, right? So the exist, you cannot just say where contact ID exists. So what you need to do in here is you need to introduce the concept that we are talking about, the correlated query. So to do that, what you're going to say, you're going to say and in here, you're going to match on two conditions. And we're going to alias the table now that we have learned in the last class, the concept. So I'm saying this table as C and this table as E. Okay. Now what do you want to do in between these two tables? Do you want to match on contact ID, right? You don't want to return all the contact ID from person.contact. What do you want to do? You want to say, give me only those employees whose contact ID matches from person.contact, right? So that's what you're doing. You're taking the contact ID from employee and passing it to the outer query. So we'll do the same thing, but a little different this time. So you're going to say C dot contact ID is equals to E dot contact ID. Okay. So if I run the query now, let's see what happens. So see, when I'm running using the exist, I'm getting only one record from person.contact. Does this make sense? So basically what you're doing, you introduced, because you can, with the exist, you cannot do condition like this where contact ID in, right? You cannot use this because we said we're going to use the exist and we're going to introduce the concept of correlated subquery, right? So in order to do the correlated subquery, you have to do is you say, okay, select star from person.contact where exist, and what has to be exist in the inner query? The employee ID has to be 100 and the contact ID. So think about this now. What I did in here, I said end condition, and I say, let me do this. I say this. I mean, it's the same thing, but I'm just making it easier to understand. So what do you do in here? Employee, right? E.contact ID. So E.contact ID is what? It's the contact ID from human resources.employee table, right? E.contact ID is the column from human resources.employee. Do we have the contact ID in this table? Yes, we do, right? Here it is. So when I'm saying E.contact ID, it means this contact ID, right? For the employee 100, right? And when I say C.contact ID, it's from which table? From the outer query. Do we have the contact ID in the outer query? Yes, we do. So what we're saying is, now when you run the query, match the inner query contact ID and the outer query. And if it's match, then only return the result for the matching one. Okay? Don't return for the query that doesn't match. Does it make sense? So basically, when you do this, what you did, you matching the inner table and the outer table column contact ID. Okay? So now how this query becomes correlated query? Can you run the inner query by itself? No. This time you cannot run the inner query by itself. You would be able to run this query by itself, right? But you cannot run this inner query by itself. Why? Because it references a table called C. And what is your C table? That is person.contact. So would you be able to run this query? No, because the person.contact is not in here in the inner query. It's on the outer query. So does your inner query dependent on the outer query? Yes. For which column? For C.contact ID. So that's why if you try to run the inner query, it's going to get an error. The C.contact ID couldn't be bound. It means the C.contact is, it cannot find the reference for C. What C is in this query, right? It's not selected. So that's why if your inner query is dependent on the outer query, right? The inner query is dependent on the outer query. These kind of queries becomes the correlated subquery. Okay, so this is the correlated subquery when your inner query is dependent on the outer query. Does it make sense? Okay, so now let's make one more try to understand what we did in here. Did you understood this condition where we say E.contact ID equals to C.contact ID? What I'm going to do is I'm going to run the two queries separate first to make it more clear. Okay. So when you were doing exist, what did you say is, okay, give me the employee ID 100. Does the employee ID 100 exist? Yes, it exists. So what it's going to do, if you don't have this condition, it's going to say run for select star from person.contact. So what it used to do, it used to run all the records from the table because this table has a record in it, right? So if it used to exist, it used to run the whole table. But what you wanted, you want to run the person.contact, or you want to return from person.contact only those records which are matching with the inner query, right? Do you want to match on the contact ID from the inner query, right? So how do you do that? If I ask you, Imano, can you give me from person.contact only those person's contact whose employee ID is 100? How do you do that? How do you find out from person.contact only those employees who are employee ID 100? You would go in person.contact and you say select star from person.contact where contact ID equals to 1099, right? That's what you're going to do. Select star from person.contact where contact ID equals to 1099, right? That's what you're going to do. So now basically what you're doing when you do that, when you do contact ID equals to 1099, where do you get this contact ID from? From this table, right? From this table. From the upper table. And what is the column in here? Did you get it? E dot contact ID. That's what you get, right? The E is the name of the table, which is E, and you're getting the contact ID column, right? So is 1099 is coming from where? From E dot contact ID, right? So instead of what you can say, 1099 is nothing but E dot contact ID, right? And what is this contact ID? This column is from person dot contact. So let's say if I say this table as C, so you can say where C dot contact ID equals to E dot contact ID, right? So that's what we did here. We said and we want to match on the condition where E dot contact ID equals to C dot contact ID. Okay. So what does it do is when it runs the outer query, it will make sure when the contact ID matches, then only it returns the person.contact record. Okay. Now how it could be useful, because there are two, you can write either this query or this query for the correlated subquery. The correlated subqueries are useful when you have more than one condition. If you have one condition, you can write the query this way. Okay. So you don't have to make this complex query, right? What I'm introducing a new thing here is when the correlated subquery would be useful. It would be useful when you have more than one condition to do it together. More than one condition to match between two tables. Okay. Then you have to use the correlated subquery. Okay. It would be useful. So let's say if it's just a single, let's say if it's just only one, if you have to match only one column, then you can just do the non-correlated subquery. But when do you use the correlated subquery? Usually when you have more than one condition to match. Okay. All right. So we're going to see how we can have, when we can have more than one condition to match. Okay. Let's see this. But is it clear till now what is correlated subquery and why we are putting E dot contact ID and C dot contact ID in here? Is it clear? Okay. So if it's clear, we're going to see now how correlated query can be useful when you have more than one condition. If you have more than one condition, I will tell you that you cannot use it. You cannot do two conditions with the correlated, non-correlated subquery. You have to use the correlated subquery. Okay. Let's jump back to our, okay. So in here, think about this. I will say, what I want to do is for a correlated subquery, I want to check. Yes, this is the example. For correlated query, when you have to match more than one condition, it's useful. So if I ask you, give me all the employee from person.contact that are modified on the same date in the employee table and in the contact table. How would you do that? So now you have to match not only one condition, you have to match two conditions. When you're returning from person.contact, not only the contact ID has to match from the inner query, it has to match one more condition. There is a column called modified date in both of the tables. Okay. So I'm saying that both the record, if it's modified on the same date, then only give me the result set. Okay. So you want to find out when the person's employee record is modified and also the person's contact record is modified. So if both of the records are modified in two different tables on the same date, then only give me, else don't give me that record. Okay. How do you do that? So what you need to do, you need to match one more condition in here other than contact ID, right? You have to match that the modified date has to be same for the person, right? Okay. So what you can do in here, you can just say and, okay, and E dot, what date we want to match? E dot modified date has to be equals to C dot modified date, right? So what you do, you matching first this condition, the contact ID has to be same, and then you matching the modified date has to be same. Okay. All right. So let's look it in here, the example that we had. So I have this. Okay. So let's look what is the modified date in here in the E table for the employee 100, E dot modified date. Okay. Let's look. So the contact ID for employee 100 is 1099 and the modified date is 2004-0731, right? Okay, now let's go and look in this contact ID 10099. Does it has the same modified date? 2004? No, it has no, it's 1998. So does the modified date matches between the two records? No, it doesn't match, right? So if it doesn't match, do you want to see the record? No. Both thing has to match. The contact ID has to match and the modified date has to match. So if it doesn't match, it wouldn't be giving you any record, right? So let's say when you say e.modified date equals to c.modified date, would you be getting any answer for this one? No, right? See, you don't get anything. Why? Because even though the contact ID match, the modified date is not matching. Okay, so when you have to match on two conditions, you would be writing two conditions together. All right. Okay, so now what I want to do is, right now I'm just looking for one employee. I want to look for all the employees in the table. Okay, what I want to do is I want to look for all the employees in the table. So what do? I just remove this condition. Which condition? When employee ID equals to 100, right? If I remove that condition, what's going to happen? It's going to compare for all the records in the table. Okay, so let's do this. So if I remove this condition where employee ID equals to 100, okay, I removed the employee.100. If I execute, what happens? I get only one contact ID, that is 1002. What does it mean? It means contact ID 1002 in both the tables, in employee and contact ID, has been modified on the same date. So what's the date in here? 1997, 1205, right? 1997, 1205. So let's look in here. We don't know the employee ID for this person. So let's look in here. I don't know what's the employee ID for contact ID 1002. Let's see, it's employee ID 1 or 2 maybe. Hold on. Let me find that record. Okay, 1002, right? It was 1002. Yep. Okay. So see, what's the, I'm just gonna find the employee ID. Oh, it's employee ID 3. Okay. So what does it do? Let's look here. So for employee ID 3, what's the contact ID? 1002. If you run these two query together, the contact ID matches between both the tables. So the one record is coming from employee, the second record is coming from the contact. Contact ID matches? Yes. Now look at the modified date. Is modified date same between both the tables? Yes. So that's why when you said, okay, from person.contact and human resources.employee, give me only those employees whose contact IDs are same and they are modified on the same date. So when you run this query, you're only getting one record because there is only one employee whose contact and whose employee records are modified on the same date. All the others have been modified on different dates. Does it make sense? What I'm trying to do now? How does SQL, how SQL is doing this thing? Okay, how SQL is doing this thing? SQL, what does it do is, how this query is working. Let's try to understand what would be happening on the back. So SQL does is, it goes in here. Okay, let me put this one in here and C and C. Okay, so what I'm saying is, from C table give me contact ID and modified date, and from E table give me contact ID and modified date. Okay, now what SQL does is, it goes in the contact ID table, okay, and it takes the contact ID 1209. It says, does contact ID 1209 is there in the contact table? No, right? So if it doesn't exist, what it's going to do, it's going to leave the record. So how it's working in here is, it says, okay, from the human resources.employee, take the first contact ID returned by the table, which is what? 1209. If it exists in here, okay, if 1209 is in both the tables, then check if the modified date is same. Okay, if the modified date is same, so then it checks the modified date. Let me the first table and checks 1209 exists in both the tables, yes. Then check on the date. Is the date same? The date is not same, right? So the contact IDs matches, but the date is not same, right? So it's not gonna return because it's matching on both. So first it matches on the contact ID. Oh, it exists. And then it checks on the modified date. Does the modified date is same? No. So it will not return. And it will go from all the records in human resources.employee. How many records we have in the human resources.employee? 290 records. So it goes from all the way from top to bottom doing the same thing. Match on the contact ID. Oh yes, it exists. Match on the modified date because that's our second condition. Does it match? No, for the same contact ID. Then it skips the record. So it's going to do for all of them one by one. First match on contact ID. If contact ID is found, then match on the modified date. If both of the conditions matches, then it shows you the record. And it's keep doing that until all the records are done from human resources.employee. Why? Because your inner query is human resources.employee. So it checks all the record from human resources.employee doing the same condition. Okay. When it matches, it shows the record. Is it clear? Okay. All right. Now we have seen in the last class what is the disadvantage of having a subquery. The disadvantage of subquery is you cannot have columns from the inner query, right? So here I cannot say give me e.contactID, right? You cannot mention the column from the inner query in the outer query. You can do the other way. You can mention the column in the inner query from the outer table, but in the outer table you cannot do this. You cannot say give me e.contactID because it's not going to let you do that. You cannot select column from the inner table. Does it make sense? So you cannot show to the user the columns from the inner table. That's the limitation of the subquery. You cannot have any of the columns from your inner query. Okay. All right. Now let's think about this. Can you do this the same query with the non-correlated subquery? Can you do the same thing with the non-correlated subquery? Think about this. How can you do it? Let's go back. So if you try to do this, select star from person.contact where contact ID in, select contact ID from human resources.employee, right? If you try to do this way, if you try, I'm just showing you, if you think about, you have to match both the conditions and you do this, select star from person.contact where contact ID in, select contact ID from human resources.employee, right? That's what you did in here. Where? When you're trying to do the replacement for this query, right? When you had one condition, what did you do? Either you do this or you do this. No, not this one. When you either you match on contact ID and or you do this one, right? I think I have deleted that query, but that query was just to match on the contact ID, not on the modified date. When you do with the correlated query, right? You say exist and then you match on one condition for the employee 100, right? Or the same way you can do with the non-correlated query is you say select star from person.contact where contact ID in, select contact ID from human resources.employee where employee ID equals to 100. So you have done the same query in both the ways, right? With using the non-correlated subquery and the correlated subquery because you had one condition. Now what did I tell you? I told you that if you have more than one condition, it is not a good idea to use the non-correlated subquery, right? So in the next step, what we have used more than one condition, right? We have used two conditions together. So, and we use the correlated subquery. That's fine. Now, can we convert the same query into a non-correlated subquery? Let's try to do it. Okay. Let's try to do that. Can we convert this correlated subquery where we have more than one condition into a non-correlated subquery? Okay. Okay, so what do? You just say select star from person.contact where contact ID in, select contact ID from human resources.employee, right? That's what you did. Okay, right? And if you try to do this and modified date in, select modified date from human resources.employee. Now what it's doing? Okay, what this one is doing. So first, does it matches both the condition together? No. What you're saying is give me from person.contact those contact which has, if the contact ID exists in human resources.employee, give me all those contact, right? This, if I run just this part, it's getting all the 290 contacts which exist in human resources.employee. And then you say, okay, take the modified date from human resources.employee and give me those records if the modified date exists in the human resources.employee. Are you checking the conditions on the contact ID together? No. What you're checking is, you're checking one condition at a time. You say, okay, if the contact exists in human resources.employee, give me all those contacts. First you do that. And then you say, okay, the modified date also has to be in the human resources.employee. You are not matching on the record. Does it make sense? You are not matching the two conditions on the same record. What you say is, if the modified date is there in the table, give me the record. If the contact ID is there in the table, give me the record. So that's why you are getting the two record now. Okay, so what you're saying is, just check if the date is there in the table, give me the record. If the contact ID is there in the table, give me the record. That's what it is doing. And we don't want that. We want is both the condition has to be matched together. So this query is wrong. So the only way to do the query when you want to match both the conditions on the same row is using the correlated subquery. Okay, we're not talking about the joins here. When we're going to use the joins, we use it. But for how to do with the subquery is the only way to do this, the correct ways. So here, let's make sure you're understanding. Here, when you're saying this, you're matching both the conditions on the same record. In here, you're matching the conditions on the table, okay, not on the same record. That's why you're getting two records. So let's see, we know the 1002 matches, but let's see if this record is right, what I ask you. The modified date is same, 1997, 1205. So see if the contact ID 1010 has the same date. Let's see, let's find out. So if I do select star from which table, human resources.employee, right? Where contact ID is equals to what? 1010, right? So let's try to see if both the record has the same modified date. Okay, the modified date for 1010 is 1997. What's the modified date in here? 1998. Does the modified date matches between both the tables? No. So we are getting a false record in the second one. Why? Because we have used the non-correlated subquery. And the non-correlated subquery does is, it matches the record if it exists in the table, then give it. So that's why. What happened was, think about this. The thing happened here is, from person.contact, first you asked, give me all the contact that exist. And then you said, if the modified date in the human resources.employee is in the contact ID as well. So let's look at this. What would have been happened? Why you are getting the second record? You are getting the second record because look at this. You're getting the modified date of this one. You're getting the modified date of 1002. Okay. So you say select the modified date. You selected all the modified dates. Okay. So this one, 19. Why do we get this one? Because it says, okay, get the modified date of 1002. Okay, it says, okay, 1997, 1205. And this record also has the same date. So because even though the contact ID doesn't match, the date matches. So what you're doing is you're just matching one condition. Okay, so only way to do if you have more than one condition in the subquery is you have to write a correlated subquery. Okay, so this is, think about, if you think about this way, if you're trying to match two conditions one by one, it's not correct. Okay, because it doesn't match the conditions on each record individually. First it checks the contact ID on the table and then it checks modified date on the table. Okay, is it clear? All right. So you understood when you would be using the correlated subqueries. Okay, all right. Now let's see. Let's see a few more examples. Now what I want to do is, Let me think about an example. Okay, let's look at this table, employee pay history table. Okay, so now what you want to do is from employee pay history table, do you see the employee ID? What is his pay rate? So you can see the pay rate in here for each of the employee, right? But for some employees, you see the 3 pay rates. Why? Because let's say if the person joined in and he got the hike during his work, so his rate changed on 1998 105 was this. On 2000 he got promoted to, and his salary got hiked to $23 per hour, and then on 2002 he got hiked to $29.8 per hour, right? So what this table is showing is what are their rates throughout the time they work for the company, right? So they show, this is the start date. If you see in here, this is the rate change date for employee ID. When did the rate got changed, right? So you see in here. Okay, so now if I ask you, so same way for the employee ID 6, you see the 2 records. Why? Because his rate was 24 and then it got amended or it got changed on 1999 again, $28. So now if I ask you here, can you give me for all the employees what are their pay rate? How do you do that? For each employee, what is their current pay rate? How do you do that? So in here, because you're getting for employee ID, you're getting 4 records. What I want is only the latest rate for the employee. I don't want to see their past rate. So let's say if the company says, give me a record for the employee with their current rate. What is their current rate? How do you do that? What would be your query? So how do you know if it's the current rate for the employee? How do you know? By looking at this table. For employee ID 4, what is his current rate? Yes, $29.84, right? How do you know that? How do you know it's the current rate? Right, you look at the year and whatever is the max year or at last change, that what we think is the current record, right? So basically, why you didn't take these 3? Because the rate was, the rate change date, the date was the maximum. So what did you do? From each of these 3 records, which one you picked where the rate change date was highest, right? So you do the same for 6. If I ask you what is the current rate for employee ID 6, you say 37.5. How did you find out? Because the date is the maximum between both 2, right? Or the latest date. So how do you convert this into the query so that you don't get multiple records for each employee? How do you do that? You don't get multiple rows for each employee. You just get the current rate. How do you do that? If you have to do, how do you get employees? So first, what you need to get? You need to get the date first, right? What you need to do? You need to get the date first. So how can you get the max date? If the employee has 3 dates, how do you get the max date? You need to bucket by employee, right? If you can bucket by employee and then if you can pull the max of date, that's it, right? So what do you do? Do you need to do anything for the employee ID 1? No. Do you need to do anything for employee ID 2? No. Do you need to do anything for the employee ID 4? Yes. You bucket the employee 4 and then you pull the max of date, right? Now, how do you bucket your records? How do you bucket your records? Using a group by, right? So what do you need to do? Yes, very good. So what you need to do? You need to say group by employee ID. So if you say group by employee ID, now this employee ID is in one bucket. Now, do you need all the 3 dates? No, you just need which date? The max of this, right? Whatever the maximum date is in this one, right? So I have the query in here. What do? I say group by employee ID from employee pay history table. And what I'm taking the employee ID and the max of rate change date. And that is nothing but their current date. Yep. Right? So see, Now I'm getting only one record for the employee 4. Why? Because I'm getting the max date what it has in all the 3 records. Same for the 6, I'm getting only one record out of 3 where the date is max. Now, do you have the pay rate in here? No. Your goal was to find out what's their current pay rate. You don't have the pay rate. What do you do in order to get the current pay rate? Can you just say in here max of rate? Pay rate, I think. Can you do that? Can you just say the max of pay rate in here? Think about this. Just the max of rate. Can you do that? If you do max of rate, you're gonna get the rate. But do you think it's the correct rate? If you do max of rate, is it their current rate? In most of the cases, it would be true because the people get hike. But think about if the people get the demotion. From promotion, they don't get the promotion, but they demoted. They were not performing good. So it might be they were getting $50 per hour when they hired and they didn't perform well according to the job responsibilities. They said, okay, we're gonna pay you $40 now. Right? It could be possible. So if you do the max rate, do you gonna get the correct value? No, because what it's gonna do is it's gonna get their latest date, but the rate could be the older one whenever they get paid higher, right? So is this query correct? No. So what you need to do, think about now. So you know the date and you know the employee ID. What you all need to do? So now think about these 2 tables you have. Right? So in the 4th, you know you have to look for the date 2001. So if I ask you in here, look at these 3 records. Which record do you want out of the 3 records for the employee ID 4? Where date is 2002-01, right? 1, right? So we need that one. We need the rate for this. So what did you do in between these 2 tables? You matched on 2 conditions. First, you matched on the employee ID and then you matched on the date, right? Same for the employee ID 6. You took the employee ID 6 in here, you match. But how many records you found for employee ID 6? 3. Then what do? In order to get the rate, you have to match on the date. 2002-0601. 2002-0601. So that's his rate. So if you are matching on both the conditions and then you get the corresponding rate from the above table, right? So from the below table, what did you do? You did get the highest date, the latest date, and then you have to match again on this table, right? And then you have to get the rate. So you match on these 2 conditions and then you get the rate. So you have the 2 query. Think about this now as a correlated subquery. You have 2 queries. One would be inner, one would be outer. What would be your outer query? The above one, right? Because you have to get the pay rate. And the pay rate doesn't exist on the second query. So you have to use the first query as the outer query, and then you match on the inner query, which is this one, on which 2 columns, employee ID and the current date, right? So if you do this, you're gonna get the rate, right? So think about this as 2 queries. Now you have to merge these 2 queries into subquery and make one inner, make one outer. So this one would be your outer query because you need the rate. The rate doesn't exist in here. So you make this outer query and make this inner query. Now what conditions you have to match between inner and outer? 2 conditions. Employee ID has to be same and the date has to be same. If the date is same, you know you're getting the correct rate. Does it make sense? Right? So let's convert this query into the subquery, correlated subquery. We do in here is, okay, hold on. All right. So let's take this. Okay. What do I say? This is my outer query and this is my inner query, right? So what do? I put where, right? So whenever you have to do the correlated subquery, what you have to do, you use the exist, right? Exists, right? With S in it. Okay, you say where exists, and what conditions you're gonna match? You're gonna match on 2 conditions. Okay, now think about this. how do you gonna match these two conditions on the outer query? This is little complex one. Can you match directly in here? Can you just say where condition in here? No, because what happened? Is this your base table? No, this is your aggregated table, right? The inner query is what? It's an aggregated table. So do you want the column from the aggregated table, right? Okay, so you need the column from the aggregated table. You cannot just say in here a where condition, and you cannot say where e dot, let's say the outer query is employee, pay history I say is EP, and inner one I say as employee pay history is current, right? I cannot just say EP dot employee ID and EPC dot. Let's try to do this. What I'm doing is, because I have a group by, what do I need to do? If I'm matching on which column? I'm matching on the aggregated data. So can you use the aggregated data in the where condition? Is this your aggregated column? Yes or no? The max of rate change date. Yes. So when you have the aggregated column, what did we see when we were doing the group by? Where do you use if you have to match a conditions on the aggregated column? Where do you use that column? In where or in having? You have to use the having condition, right? You cannot use in the where condition if the column is a aggregated one. Very good, right? So what we have to use? We have to use the having condition. So in the having, what do you gonna say? You're gonna say having EP dot, what is the column in here we want to match? Let's say the employee ID first. EP dot employee ID is equals to EPC dot employee ID. And what's the other condition? And EPC dot, this is the column max of rate change date, right? Let's see if this works. And, equals to EP dot rate change date, right? Or let's do this. What's the name of the column? The current date, okay? So I use as a current date, okay? Or we don't need to do the EPC, okay? So the max of rate change date is equals to EP dot rate change date, right? So we are using having because the max of rate change date is an aggregate column and you cannot use in the where condition. So you're using having EP dot employee ID equals to EPC dot employee ID, and max of rate change date, which is the inner query, is equals to EP dot rate change date, right? Does it make sense? So you made the inner query and now you run it. See? And what do you want to do? You want to, let's say, see by order by employee ID, okay? So that you get the employee ID 1, first, 2, 3. So how many record now you're getting for each of the employee ID? Only one record, right? See, I don't have 3 records for employee ID 4. I don't have 3 records for employee ID 6, right? And I'm getting their current pay rate, 37.5, right? For employee ID 4, 29.8, right? So think about this. Why did you use the correlated subquery in here? How many conditions you had to match? 2 of them. That their employee ID has to be same and their max of rate change date is equals to rate change date, right? So you matched on 2 conditions together. So that's why you were using the correlated subquery. And why do you use this table as outer? Because you needed the pay rate, right? You needed the pay rate. The inner query, so that this query doesn't have the rate. It just has 2 columns on which you have to match. So that's why you use this as an outer query and this is an inner query. And because we had to do the group by, use the group by in the inner query in order to get the data, you were not using where, you were using having this time, because it was an aggregated column, the one of the column on which we have to match. Does it make sense? So think about this. Till now, whatever we have learned the subqueries, we have learned the exist, we have learned how to use the aggregate, how to use the group by, how to use the having. Everything is going in one query, right? So if you don't remember how when you have the aggregate column, whether to use where or having, you won't be able to do this query, right? If you don't remember the group by, you won't be able to do it. If you don't remember how to do max of column, you won't be able to do these queries. So as we're gonna move into the next, and like we're gonna go more deep into the SQL, we're gonna use the previous concept. So that's why I'm trying to keep focus on, try to work on the assignments so that you don't forget the things, right? Okay, so any questions? How did we use the correlated subquery using group by? Okay, very good. So now correlated subquery, okay. Oops. Just give me a second, okay. Let me clean up a little bit here. So think about this. All right, now think about this thing. Can you use the same query with using a non-correlated subquery? Can you do this where employee ID in, you match the condition, and where you say rate change date in, max of rate change date? Can you do that using the non-correlated subquery? Checking one condition at a time? No. I told you, if you have more than one condition, if you try to do this, you might be getting the wrong records. Okay, so see, if you run this query, you're getting 297 records instead of 290. It means there is something wrong with this query, right? You're not getting their current pay rate. So it might be for one of the employee we were getting the duplicates, and it's not necessary that you're gonna have the current rate for the employee. So you cannot use non-correlated subquery when you have more than one conditions, right? Is it clear? We have seen two examples, and in both of the examples it gave us the wrong result. Okay, when we try to use the non-correlated subquery for more than one condition, and it give you the right result, but the query is not correct. Okay, sometimes what happens is, but I mean, like, there are coincident, there is no record exist which could have the contradiction, and you would get same result in both of them, but the query is not correct way. Okay, that's not the way of doing it correct. You might get the result right sometime, but that's not the correct query. Okay, so if there is, going forward, if there is something happens, there is a change in data, you might get the wrong result. Okay, so with the time, with the, you can get the correct result for a particular time, but not always. Okay, so make sure whenever you have more than one conditions, more than one condition for the subquery, what you're going to use? Correlated subquery, right? All right. Okay, so did you understood how to use that? Why did we use the table alias? So think about, if I don't have had a table alias in here, what I would be using everywhere instead of EP? I would be using this whole name. That would make query very huge, right? Because the EP is the short name for the table. And think about where you have to say EP dot employee ID, what you would be saying, like this, right? Adventure works human resources dot employee PhD dot employee ID. Change this with the same thing, and think now you made the query so complex. right? So that's why. And think about, if I take the EPC out, what I have to use? This full name of the table. So that's why the table alias are important when you are joining. So think about, I have to replace this. Now this query looks overcomplicated just because you didn't use the convention correctly. I mean, these are both the ways are correct. You use the table alias or not, the only thing makes the difference is your table query looks very complex. It's very hard to understand. So try to make your code clean when you're using the table alias. That's what it helps to keep your code clean, right? Okay, so see, now it looks very small. That's the thing. Okay, all right. So that's what the subquery is, the correlated and the non-correlated subquery, and we have seen when could be the correlated subquery would be used, when would be the non-correlated subquery used, and what are the limitations between the subqueries. The limitations was you cannot call the column from the inner query to the outer query. So if you have to show the data from the inner and the outer both, you cannot do. You can only show the data from the outer query. Okay, that's the one thing. And the second thing, the correlated queries are used when you have more than one condition to check on the record. So each record between the two tables, if you have to check more than conditions, you would be using correlated. If you have just one conditions, you can use the non-correlated subquery. All right. So here ends the subquery. What we're gonna next into is the joins. So why I'm switching the joins in here? Because let's say in here, what do you want to do was you wanted to show, let's look at one of the example, this one, modified date one. Okay, let's go back in here where you have matched both the conditions. So this is your conditions for where employee ID, so where contact ID is same between the table and the modified date is same. Okay, so in here what are you getting? You are getting records only from the seed table, right? If I do that e dot star, I cannot do it. I cannot get the record from e table, right? I cannot show the record from the employee table. So if I want some records from the employee table and some record from the contact subquery, I cannot do it. I have to use the joins. Okay, in the SQL Server there is a join that would help to return the data from any of the table used in the joins. Okay, so in here, if you have multiple subqueries, you cannot use from any of the subquery, you cannot use the columns. That's the limitation. So let's think about this. If you want to show from human resources.employee table, you want to show the title that doesn't exist in the person.contact table. You want to show the birth date. You want to show gender, marital status in the select query. You cannot show it. So when you would be using a subquery, when you have to show data from only one table. Now, if your requirement is, if you have to select data from multiple tables, okay, if you have to select column from multiple tables to show to the user, you cannot use subquery. Okay, all right. So think when you have to decide whether I use a subquery or whether I use a joins, what you would be thinking? You would be thinking, do I need to represent the data from one table or more than one table? If your answer is more than one table, you know you have to use the join. If it's just the one table, then you can use either the joins or the subquery. Okay. For the later part, you can use both of them. You can use the subquery or the joins. But for the first part where you have to represent the data from multiple tables, you have to use the joins. There is no other option.